The next criteria that I want to talk about, criterion I want to talk about is reliability. Reliability would include things like type checking, which means what happens if a type doesn't work? What happens if you have type mismatch? What happens? We have static typing and dynamic typing, and we'll talk about all that in a later lecture in the course. What about things like exception handling? What about all these things that, in a sense, would um, allow us to not crash when something is wrong as far as the type system is concerned? Now I know that everybody's so when they hand in all their work, in the college, so everybody's so happy when the compiler goes and doesn't say anything and everything's functioning and there's a thousand warnings and nobody cares. And as long as it works, if it works, don't touch it, right? That's the attitude. But the truth is that when it comes down to production, so you might not want all these warnings because all these warnings mean that there's something really wrong that might actually manifest itself into a crash during runtime. And we don't want that to happen. Things like aliasing, having two or more distinct references or methods to the same data could actually be a breach of reliability because things can change and you don't even know why. And the reason is because there happens to be two aliases for the same data. So if a language does not allow that, it's more reliable. A language that is more readable and writable is by definition also usually more reliable. Why is that true? Because a language that does not support natural ways of expressing your thoughts, or whatever it is, will cause you to express them in an unnatural way, in a roundabout way. You would figure out how to do it, some kind of contorted, I don't know what. And what would happen is that at the end, you might make mistakes. And mistakes are the beginning of the fall. Means if there is a vulnerability over there, so it might manifest itself afterwards as some kind of fault, and therefore it will become the language become unreliable. So usually readability and writability usually are things that are allow for greater reliability, but it's a separate issue. Is something reliable or is it not reliable? Another very important criteria that we need to talk about is the criteria of cost. How much do things cost? Now, why is that important? Sometimes you could have something that's very, very good, but it's super expensive, and therefore you don't want to use it. It could be that a new language came out and it's like the greatest language in the world, but nobody knows how to program it, knows how to program it in it yet. So what would happen is you're going to have to go train your programmers. You would have to buy all kind of compilers. You might have to do all these things are criteria that you might take into account. Things like maybe a vibrant community on the internet is a cost factor. Because why invent the wheel? Sometimes you just have to go and ask or just search the internet for the question that has been asked and you get the answer. So that could be another cost factor, meaning that if the language does have, let's say, a vibrant internet community, so your cost factor will go down. And you might decide, okay, I'd rather use this language because it has a lower cost form. Or if there were free compilers out there, so you might say, okay, I'd rather use that because I can't afford to pay for proprietary compiler with a proprietary compiler. Can't afford it. I happen to have a startup, a basement startup, and I need to work with what I have. Right, finances are tight, and I can't work with. I can't go pay all kinds of big companies, big tech, all kind of money for their products. So that could be a factor. How much does it cost to execute the program? How fast does the program work? How fast does the program compile? I mean, just imagine you are in industry, let's say in the animation industry. So I don't know if you guys know, In the animation industry, the longest thing is every time running the rendering engines to create the movies. So imagine the same idea in our languages, that every time you want to compile something with all its dependencies and all everything else, everybody has a 45-minute coffee break. So you can't do that either. So the question is, how fast are the compilers? How efficient are they? How available are they? How fast do they create the execution of code? Is it a fast code? Is it an optimized code? Is it an optimized code? All these things are cost factors, which you would take into account when you decide on the language you want to use. Um, Maintenance costs. Everybody knows that maintaining code is the most expensive part of the development cycle, and we learned that in the software engineering. And sometimes maintaining cost is expensive. So how easily does the language lend itself to easy maintenance? Back in the olden days, when we had languages like BASIC and stuff, part of the problem was what's called spaghetti code. Spaghetti code meaning, like, I don't know if any of you ever programmed in BASIC. So you would write some lines of code and you would number them 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever. And then you would say, oh, if some condition is true, go to line 55. And over there you say, if some condition is true, go back to line 23. And what would happen is you get spaghetti code, unstructured code. And then if somebody wants to maintain some kind of program written with a spaghetti code language, what would happen is that he might change a piece of code not knowing what it influences. It could influence a whole bunch of other places where he didn't even know that the flow of control would reach this area that he's correcting from that area of the code, and he might break something else. The maintenance, it's called maintenance hell, that people had to go through, is what created a structured programming back in the 60s. So all these things are important cost factors. We have things like reliability. If your language is not reliable, so you might have high costs that come out of it. Or, as I said, there's a lot of issues that go into this cost factor issue.